based on the book Sousage Emigration by Anatoly Steklov. Orange Revenger Film Company. All events described in this story are true. Some names have been changed. The beginning of the story. The new generation, Jews and non-Jews, having read eyewitness accounts, will decide for themselves whether our emigration was easy and simple, whether it was a sausage emigration. The War of the Jews, 1970 to 1990. There was no sausage immigration. The expression sausage immigration was born and spread by the Russian media with a clear goal. They say there was no anti-Semitism in the USSR. Those who wanted to leave left freely. Those who wanted to stay, stayed. Lie. Judge for yourself. Professors, scientists, engineers, doctors, athletes, musicians, shoemakers, tailors, builders, mechanics, trade workers, all stood up and left the anti-Semitic country of the USSR. We went nowhere without language, without guarantees, taking away children and the elderly.
You are liars. You have deceived 3 countries.
Israel, about Zionist motives. The USSR, about relatives that do not exist in Israel. And the USA, about political persecution. The Jews did not deceive Israel by leaving the USSR on Israeli visas. Hundreds of thousands were saved thanks to these fake visas. It was not a deception, but a white lie. Nobody deceived the Soviet Union. Quite the opposite. The USSR deceived the Jews by telling fairy tales about the equality of all people, equal opportunities, and respect for non-Russian culture. Deceived, that's putting it mildly. The Jews who fought for Russia, who built Russia, who enriched Russia, were not only deceived and humiliated by the USSR, but also robbed, taking away their apartments, pensions, and diplomas. The Jews did not deceive the USA. The USA is not so easily deceived. By adopting the Jackson-Vanik Amendment in 1974, the U.S. Congress recognized the Jews of the USSR as political refugees, and so we were.
Let my people go.
The departure of Jews from the Soviet Union was never easy or free. This story is a story about the struggle and flight of Jews from the USSR at the end of the 20th century. A lot has been said about this by dissidents, prisoners of Zion, and fighters against the Soviet regime. Without detracting their courage and resilience, I will say that most of those who fled were simply Jews trying to leave the anti-Semitic country of the USSR. The Jews around the world came out to protest demonstrations. I declare war on everyone who comes from Russia. Rabbi Meir Kahana, Jewish Defense League.
Let my people go.
How it started. The Jews of Ukraine and Russia, Belarus and Moldova, Lithuania and Georgia, Estonia and Uzbekistan, Azerbaijan and Siberia were leaving. Years pass, and to my surprise, what was clear in those days is distorted and deformed. It becomes clear that any history requires its chroniclers, and therefore, no one will talk about those events receding in time better than their witnesses or participants. You've been denied permission to leave the USSR for Israel. We have no way to let you out. You will be able to apply again only after 6 months.
Let my people go.
Why did the Jews leave? Anti-Semitism was growing in the country. Jewish newspapers, books, theaters, and even music were banned or restricted. Synagogues and Jewish cemeteries were closed. Circumcision of infants, weddings under the chuppah, kosher food, and all Jewish religious life were prohibited. There are many known cases when Jews were forced to change their surnames to more harmonious ones. There was a quota for Jewish students due to restrictions on admission to universities. Due to the notorious quota, Jewish youth were forced to leave for distant cities of the Soviet Union. Izia goes to Tomsk. Sonia goes to Omsk. Fima goes to Novosibirsk. Borya goes to Krasnoyarsk. Ilyusha is going to Perm. One day, Uncle Sasha, a violinist and restaurant musician, came to visit us, and he said a new decree came from the city executive committee to prohibit the playing of Jewish melodies in restaurants. Bublichkia, Tumbalalaika, 740, and similar. These cheerful Jewish songs were declared criminal and were forbidden to be performed. Grandad Solomon. In the USSR, administrative punishment meetings are practiced for all Jews trying to leave for Israel for permanent residence. On Thursday, an open-to-the-public Communist Party meeting was held in the assembly hall of the shoe factory. On the agenda, there was one issue: the expulsion from the party of Solomon Golden in connection with his departure for permanent residence in Israel. The 82-year-old Grandad Solomon went to this meeting as if it were an execution. He worked at the factory for more than 30 years. All his friends and students were in the hall. I propose to immediately expel him from the Communist Party. Let him go back to his own Israel.
Отпусти народ мой! Let my people go.
Chernovtsi, the capital of Jewish Russia. The majestic city of Moscow is the capital of the Soviet Union. But the Jewish capitals of the USSR were Odessa and Vitebsk, Chisinau and Bobrusk, Kharkov and Kiev. Traditions and rituals were observed here, and Jewish holidays were celebrated. Chernovtsi was one of these cities. The former central synagogue converted into a cinema. Wedding. In 1979, Bronya and I were married. There was no chuppah. We were standing on Ukrainian towels. Why did the Soviet Union collapse?
It was you Jews who destroyed the Soviet Union.
Of course, the mass exodus of Jews from the USSR played a certain role in the collapse of the Soviet Union. But the Soviet Union did not collapse just because of the Jews. There were other important reasons. One of the reasons for the collapse of the USSR is the war in Afghanistan, a senseless, irresponsible criminal war. 10,000 lost young lives. Afghanistan was one of the important reasons for the collapse of the Soviet Union. Chernobyl crashes. The Soviet Union hid the scale of the disaster. It was only when nuclear rain fell in Sweden and Finland that the world realized that a terrible catastrophe had occurred. Every construction organization in Ukraine has received orders to build settlements for evacuated residents in the suburbs of Chernobyl. The management announced a general meeting. Construction teams were gathering. Each team had to be led by an engineer. Despite the increased pay for this work, no one was in a hurry to go to Chernobyl. Dangerous. Suddenly, in the silence of the hall, my friend Monya stood up. The chief engineer, Manuel Goldenberg, said, "I will go." And he went and assembled a team of workers. Monya later laughed and talked about the glow-in-the-dark cats of Chernobyl and how there was no order at the construction site either. Many years later, Chernobyl got you, Monya. May you rest in peace. The Chernobyl disaster was also one of the reasons for the collapse of the USSR.
Отпусти народ мой. Let my people go.
Corruption.
Is corruption bad? Corruption is good.
Дорогие товарищи, сегодня я вам должен сказать о недопустимости коррупции в Советском Союзе. Сиськи-масиськи, и это мы еще можем увидеть.
Corruption. In the 80s, the word corruption was not used. Rollback and cutting were born already in the dashing 90s. And in our time, they used the words shadow economy, bribes, shopkeepers, currency traders. My mother also told me that there were long lines in the Soviet Union for 70 years for everything. There was not enough food and shoes, furniture and clothing, building materials or medicine. All this played an important role in the collapse of the Soviet Union. Jews in World War II, the Holocaust. In the Soviet Union, the Holocaust was forgotten. It was not studied in school. There were no Holocaust museums. Many Jews fought heroically during the Second World War, bringing victory closer.
We know you Jews. We fought in Tashkent.
My father, Yakov Glazer, went through the entire war and liberated Budapest. My father-in-law, Yakov Seufer, he reached Berlin with victory. My mother, Serafima, she spent the war years in evacuation in Mordovia. My grandfather and grandmother were buried there. My wife's mother, Fania, survived in the Romanian ghetto in the town of Bershad. In 1944, Red Army soldiers liberated this camp. Among them was Yakov Seufer, my father-in-law. Right there, in the liberated camp, they got married. Fania waited for her husband until he returned from the war. The family of my uncle Lazar, with 6 children, died in the Treblinka concentration camp. Their names are kept in the archives of the Yad Vashem Museum in Jerusalem. Mom's friend, Aunt Anne, survived the Leningrad blockade. Cousin Lucy was rescued by Ukrainian peasants. She ended up in a Polish shelter, and in the end of the ends, in Israel. Denied. Refusal. Moscow, Ovir. Refusal. Head of Ovir. Refusal. During the refusals, we could not find a job. Jews, non-Jews.
Why do you write only about Jews?
Нежная правда в красивых одеждах ходила.
Of course, a huge number of non-Jews, Russians, Ukrainians, Belarusians, and others sympathized with the pursuit of the Jews to escape from the communist paradise. Many helped us to find jobs and in everyday life, and many were jealous. They were ready to leave the USSR themselves. This was the time of the academic Andrei Sakharov, the time of dissidence. I remember that the greatest impression on me was made by Alexander Solzhenitsyn's story One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich, which told about Soviet prison camps and the Gulag. The leaflets with the samizdat story, read and soiled, were given to me for one day and one night. In the morning, I passed the story on to the next person. It was a shock.
И легковерная правда спокойно уснула, слюни пустила и разулыбалась во сне.
My colleague Ivan Wavrin told me about the Holodomor. Millions of Ukrainian peasants, died in the Holodomor. It was a tragedy artificially created by the Soviet government. Monument to the victims of the Holodomor in Kiev.
Мій старший брат з голоду сиру картоплю їв, але все ж таки помер з голоду. Будь-яні прокляті ті нелюді.
One day, a Baptist pastor came into my construction trailer, and he said, "Help us get building materials for our new house of worship." And I put the list on my table. I sympathized with the Baptists. We worked together. I like these guys who were strong in their faith, Baptists and Pentecostals. They respected the Jews. They said the Jews are God's chosen people, and the Holy Land of Israel was promised by God and should belong to the Jews. To give or not to give materials?
Giving materials means stealing.
I sent a truck with the necessary materials. I didn't take the money, and in the morning, there was a knock on my door. Oh no, that's it, I decided, and opened the door. Two men stood in front of my door with full buckets of freshly picked wild raspberries. Our pastor blessed you. At the request of Ivan Wavrin, already from America, I sent his father a Bible in Ukraine, a priest of the Ukrainian Uniate Church, who served 30 years in Soviet camps, for which he received a second Christian blessing. My wife and I received our third Christian blessing in Catholic Rome. One day, a Russian woman, Irina, who worked as a translator of religious literature in the Vatican, came to us in Ladispol and asked us to help repair something in her house. I fixed her bathroom, and my wife used her sewing machine and made her dress from her own material. Irina paid us royally, and in the evening, 2 Catholic priests came to visit Irina. Having learned our story, the Cardinal blessed us. You will be happy in America. Gorbachev. New broom sweeps clean. In 1986, the new General Secretary of the CPSU, Mikhail Gorbachev, came to power. Perestroika and glasnost began. It is necessary to give Jewish people the opportunity to reunite with their families in Israel. In November of 1986, the central newspaper Izvestia published a long article about the need to allow Jews to leave the USSR for family reunification. On January 7, 1987, we received permission to leave the Soviet Union for permanent residence. Dear Mikhail Sergeyevich Gorbachev, on behalf of my entire family, and we are at least 25 people, I thank you for this act of humanity. The most difficult requirement was to hand over the keys to our apartment. It was February. We had to give back the keys to the management. They didn't know what to do. Friends came to the rescue. They lived in small apartments. They invited us to temporarily live with them. Thank you, Shura and Marik. Thank you, Boryai and Ira. Long-awaited visas. We're leaving. Don't say hop until you passed CHOP. In CHOP, we were faced with a humiliating baggage check procedure. It was difficult to fit everything we needed into 35 kilograms per person. Soviet customs took away my father-in-law's military medals. How am I without medals? Said Yakov Soifer. Finally, the officer returned the medals. You deserve it. Take it. We were leaving forever. Childhood. Youth. School. Institute. Friends. Military service. Job. Hometown. our stones. Everyone, go get inside the compartment. Don't look out the windows. Don't lean out. We're crossing the border of the Soviet Union. The Iron Curtain of the USSR is left behind. First, there was Vienna. We lived in Vienna for a whole month. Then there was Italy. We lived in Italy for 2 months. Some called it the Roman breaks.
Стоять!
Thank you to the city of Ladispol for sheltering and helping hundreds of thousands of Jews during their immigration from the Soviet Union. This monument does not exist, unfortunately. America's final stop. John F. Kennedy Airport. Our entire large family greeted us. My father said a toast.
Честного года, я вас поздравляю. Желаю вам счастья, здоровья, все наилучшего в жизни. Ура! Мишура, Буби, Иерусалим! Ура!
С небес золотые берега, тянет полная река, яркой жизни казино, это каждому дано. Твой запад и восток, денег полный кошелек.
We are finally becoming citizens of this great country. I hereby pledge that I absolutely and completely renounce allegiance to any foreign monarch, potentate, state, or sovereignty of which I have been a subject or citizen before this day. That I will support and defend the Constitution and laws of the United States of America against all enemies, foreign and domestic. So help me God. Am Israel Chai. Israel is in our hearts. We are the same people. We're with you, Israel. The land of Israel belongs to the Jews.
Living in America.
Money in America does not fall from the sky. On the contrary, we had to work a lot and hard. But we have never regretted our decision. God bless America.